Hey everybody, this is Mark Smith. I'm the host of Digital Roughnecks. I'm here with Joshua Adler, who is the CEO of Sourcewater. Hey, welcome, Joshua. Or
Thanks so much,
Josh.
Mark.
Is it
Yeah,
Josh
Josh
or
is great.
Josh? Hey, so Josh,
Only my mother called me Joshua.
when you
Everybody
were
else is Josh.
okay. So Josh, I found you and I'm really intrigued because of, well, first of all, going to your website and seeing that you have 10 patents, but then also how you use AI and deep learning, along with satellite imagery. And that really intrigued me because that's one of the themes of Digital Roughnecks. So anyway, tell me about how you got started and how you got into, using AI in your business.
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of funny how it came around, Mark. I originally I've been starting companies since I was about 16 years old in all different kinds of industries. And if you can tell from the gray beard, I'm further past, pretty much twice past 16 now. But when I was in a program at MIT called Energy Ventures in 2012, 2013, and I was really interested in the rise of hydraulic fracturing, aka unconventional energy, in that kind of 2005 to 2012 period, and was excited about the growth of this industry in our country. I was looking for what my next venture was going to be, and I was looking for areas where there was a big industry growing quickly, where there'd be a lot of opportunity for new solutions as new problems arrive. And so my my question around the growth of hydraulic fracturing as an industry was, something gets this big this fast, there's no way they know what they're doing. There's got to be problems to solve. What is it that's new about unconventional energy compared to conventional? Because whatever that is, that's going to be where the opportunities are. And it seemed to me, after really digging into it, that water was what was really new. All of a sudden, water was the biggest thing in or out of the upstream supply chain on both sides. And that had just never been true before. And so my question was, I'm not going to invent some new membrane or some new kind of pump or some new kind of chemistry. That's not my background. That's not my expertise. But I've done a lot of things around data, internet, software, IT. Where's the data around water as a commodity in the upstream supply chain? How do you know where to get it from, where to send it to, who has it, who needs it, what to do when it doesn't show up, what's the market clearing price? And so what all that led to was an idea to create the first online marketplace for water in oil and gas for sourcing, recycling, and disposal. And that started in the Marcellus, Pennsylvania, because they really have a shortage of water disposal capacity there. And so there's a lot of motivation to recycle water when they can. And my thought was, hey, maybe I can connect the operators so that they can recycle with each other more efficiently. And that's a win for everybody. There's less freshwater consumption, less disposal, and a lot lower cost because you're not having to haul water long distance to SWDs in Ohio. So that's where it started, creating this marketplace. And, this was 2014, 2013. And so we went into the 2015, 2016 downturn, seems like forever ago now. We relocated to Houston and focused on the Permian because it was the only place where anything was going on. And so we relearned everything from scratch about how the water supply chain works. The Permian, totally, completely different from the Marcellus. I mean, just, handling the same stuff, everything about it different. And as we grew to understand that market over the years, we started coming out of the downturn 2017. Market started picking up. We started to have a lot of people coming to visit our site, want to look at our marketplace. And along the way, of course, we were spending a lot of time out in Midland, and we drive around meeting with clients, talking to landowners, and all the time you'll see these big frac ponds by the side of the road. You'll see a sign that says "Water for sale. Call this number." And so, of course, we'd call those numbers, and we'd get somebody on the other end of the line who'd say, "I can sell my water on the internet. That's fantastic. Sign me up." And so we realized, hey, these people who have frac pits on the properties, because the water belongs to the landowner, they're really excited about us. They're like our best potential clients. How do we find all the people who have a frac pond so we can get them listed because that water, they've already built the infrastructure, there's money in it, the wells are drilled, and they've got a commodity, a resource, valuable water that is literally blown away in the sun every day if they can't find somebody who's going to do something useful with it. And so, how do we find them? Well, it turns out in the state of Texas, and I'm not saying this is true everywhere, but in the state of Texas, if you are a surface owner and you want to dig a ditch on your property and you want to line it with some plastic and pump it full of groundwater from wells on your property, and you want to sell that to an oil company, that is your God given right as a Texan. And there is not really any part of that process during which you need to ask the government for permission or tell them what you're doing. And so, what that means is there is this critical step in the oil field supply chain, which is the frac pond, because all fracs need a frac pond. You got to accumulate that water before you can really quickly inject it at high pressure to fracture the well. So, this is something that always gets built, always gets filled before a frac can happen. And yet, there are no records of it. And we wanted to find these people because we wanted to get them on our marketplace. But turns out we couldn't find them. So we said, well, how are we going to do that? So we had the idea after a couple trial and error, a couple of not as good ideas, but we eventually came up with a pretty good idea, which was maybe we can see squares of water in the desert from space. And satellite imagery, commercial satellite imagery, pretty new industry, just started to be affordable and available. And so we started working on building systems to identify these frac ponds in satellite imagery and relate them to the land ownership records that we had accumulated as part of our data system, our marketplace system, and thereby figure out who's got water where and how much. And we'd call them up and try to get them to sign up. And what we saw on our system was we were getting a lot of interest from operators and oilfield service companies using our marketplace to find water data. They weren't so much using it to buy and sell. And so we were basically giving them a free research service that was really valuable to figure out where's water available, how much, who owns it, water quality, what's the price, and then they'd go make a deal. And so we realized maybe we need to get out of the marketplace business and get into the data analytics, data services business. And that's what we did. And so we transitioned the company to being an energy data service. And the starting point was having this satellite imagery based data around frac water ponds and who owns them. And from there, we started to realize, there's a lot of other interesting things that you can see happening on the ground in this satellite imagery that either is never showing up in the regulatory data that everybody relies on, like frac ponds, or is showing up with such a long delay that it's not that useful by the time it shows up. So, for example, in Texas, spuds and completions, they get reported to the Railroad Commission, but it's usually about 6 to 9 months from the time that a spud or a completion happens to when you can see that it happened and where and when it happened on the regulator's website. So there's a really big spread there when you got a lot of drilled but uncompleted wells. You don't know who's doing what. It makes very big differences in supply and demand. And so that got us more and more into this space of using satellite imagery and then other things too, which maybe we'll talk about later, to figure out what's happening on the ground in the oil field before conventional data sources from conventional energy intelligence companies, and better and more accurately and more completely. So as part of that, we did have to build all these sophisticated systems for pulling in all of the drilling permit data and all the wellbore data and all the production data and all this stuff, because you have to have that as the context for what's going on. Everybody already has that and expects that. But we also then layer in all of this kind of new technology around what's happening from the satellite imagery, actually from a lot of mobile location data from like over 100,000 mobile phones that are moving around the oil field, subsurface insights from bringing in other kinds of data and modeling, even scraping over 1,000 local newspapers and using AI to understand what's in the little newspaper notices so that we can map where people are making drilling plans before they even file a permit. We put all this stuff together in one holistic energy platform, energy intelligence platform, where you've got the kind of the conventional old school stuff, like the drilling permits that everybody has, but you also have all these kind of new next gen intelligence sources like satellite imagery, artificial intelligence, machine learning stuff, and mobile data, artificial intelligence, machine learning type of stuff.
Fascinating. So, do you have, I mean, I'm a visual guy, so do you have anything you can show that might kind of illustrate some of this, how you take this data and then, apply the machine learning and AI and kind of explain a little bit too, because for some, the whole machine learning and deep learning is kind of a new thing. So, kind of how you go from the images towards actionable intelligence.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Mark. There's a couple things that might be useful for that. Let me pull up a couple of pictures I just happened to bring along with me, along with baby pictures and dog pictures.
Well, because I do think about, even in our own case with Clean Connect doing machine modeling, it's getting the right images, doing the labeling, just to tell the computer, hey, focus on this piece here and on this, and then you give enough images and you start training the model and whatnot. But anyway, yeah, I'm seeing your screen here. Looks
Great.
pretty cool.
Um, so this, of course, the part we were talking about, what you're seeing on the cover picture here is kind of a fly through of our SaaS platform showing where water is moving all around the oil field.
Okay.
And there's a satellite image here where we identified the well pads and frac ponds, and there's a subsurface model that we built that shows basically all the different formations where the water is going. And I'll talk about a few of these things as we get into it. Um, so overall, our mission is holistic energy intelligence, or upstream energy and water intelligence. And of course, we came from the water space, but what we've learned over the years is that the systems that we built, new kinds of systems that we built for gathering and analyzing and visualizing oil field activity, those systems turn out to be really useful for gathering, analyzing, and visualizing all kinds of oil field activity, not just the water activity. And so we've expanded into that with water at its core. And water is a really important part of it because there is way more water moving around the oil field than oil or gas. I mean, just kind of volumetrically, there's like 10 times as much water moving around as oil. So it actually being able to track that and understand it and map it really is actually covering the overwhelming amount of fluids that are moving around, even more so than crude oil. So what we do is we gather and analyze and visualize all these kinds of omni-channel data in order to be able to show upstream energy and water activity on the surface and in the subsurface more completely, more accurately, and earlier than any other source, especially your kind of traditional energy intel drilling permit type providers.
Hmm.
And so I think this picture visualizes a little better. So we're pulling in all these different kinds of data sources into our platform. So we still have our marketplace, which is not really our core business anymore, but has some great intel about kind of trading prices of water and disposal of different kinds. So that feeds some of the information. We do all of this regulatory data gathering from, gosh, a couple dozen different state organizations in half a dozen states, like the Railroad Commission in Texas, Oil Conservation Division in New Mexico, North Dakota, Pennsylvania, Ohio. We're pulling in all of this oil, gas, water, disposal, and land data. We're doing it with a new technology stack that I think is faster and better than what you get from some of the traditional drilling permit type, rig tracking type providers.
Mm-hmm.
So we like to think we do it better just because it's newer. But we also uniquely gather all kinds of water and satellite intel data that these guys just don't do. We also do a lot of geoscience analysis, understanding, mapping out the subsurface, where the geologic fault lines, where's the water really going into and coming out of, seismic activity this stuff, there's a lot of interest in it because the subsurface with respect to water is not well understood. Because basically geologists have been mapping the subsurface for 100 years to find the oil and get it out. But until now, nobody was paying much attention to mapping the subsurface for where to put the water back in. And so that's something that we've been pioneering. As I mentioned before, we built a whole system for scraping over 1,000 local newspapers just to find those notices that you have to publish in advance of filing a permit. Because sometimes those are the long lead items that help us predict who's going to drill where ahead of permits being filed. And we actually have a US patent granted on that, by the way, which is kind of interesting. Then on the right side of the screen here is where we get into the more cool and exciting stuff. So the satellite imagery analytics, where we've actually had 9 US patents granted now, and the mobile data analytics from over 100,000 mobile phones, basically creating near real-time supply chain analytics for the water trucks, the crude trucks, the sand trucks, where they're coming from, where they're going to, literally every day, within a few days of it happening. And so the platform looks kind of like this. I mean, it's just an example of pick any given disposal well or producing well, and it's showing you where the water is coming from or where the water is going to in the context of everything else going on, and being able to map, again, for any area of interest, for any formation, for any operator, for any disposal company, immediately all of the water flows from the lease to the company, to the other company, to all their leases, how it's distributed. And this all happens in less than a second when you click on the platform. It puts it all together.
Wow.
So the part we were going to kind of focus on today is the satellite imagery analytics I mentioned, where this all came from the idea that maybe we could see some things happening that don't show up in regulatory data, which we do, or that we can see things happening sooner than they show up in regulatory data, which happens quite a bit too. So as we got into this, we were basically very early movers, this basically 2017, in the idea of using commercial satellite imagery to figure out upstream activity. There are a bunch of companies that have been doing this a little longer for things like tracking crude oil tankers on the oceans, where they're coming from and going to. There's a bunch of companies that look at the tank roofs on crude and gas storage tanks at terminals, at trading hubs, and figure out how much commodity is in those tanks based on how the shadows fall off of those roofs. That's been going on for a while, but the looking at where the rigs and frac crews and well pads and ponds are moving around the upstream, it seems like we were the first company to kind of stumble onto that through this odd path that I described to you about trying to find the frac pond owners in the marketplace. So the kinds of imagery that we're analyzing, it looks like this. You can see this is actual imagery we use. Time series here. Every couple of days, we're downloading a new image of what's happening on the ground. For example, for the entire Permian Basin, 100,000 square miles. And all of this is getting processed in a matter of hours to identify new well pads as they appear. You see a line of well pads appearing on the ground here. And then on each of those well pads, you're seeing construction activity happening. You're seeing the reserve pit get built. You're seeing the reserve pit get filled, and then you're seeing it dry out. In some other places on this image, you're seeing right in the middle, you're seeing a big frac pond get built and then fill up and then empty. And so we're able to train the machine to identify each of these kinds of things and how they differ from other things that look sort of similar, and associate that with the lease locations, with the well bores, with the drilling permits, with other stuff, to map out who's doing what where as it happens.
Wow.
And that's, so the first step in doing that, besides just getting imagery, is actually building a system for training the machine to learn what do these things look like. And the first way we did that was we hired about 20 geology grad students from University of Houston, University of Texas, Texas A&M. And, we paid them an hourly rate to just sit in front of their computers on their breaks and weekends and make some extra beer money going through these images and drawing little squares around well pads and frac ponds. What we found was that actually didn't get the best results. So, and these are trained people. I mean, these are smart, graduate students
Hmm.
who know what they're looking at, but you still got a lot of quality control problems. And so we started innovating around what can we do to create better ground truth data sets. And we started to experiment with using drilling permit locations and wellbore locations and regulatory data on historical time series imagery to train the system on what those things look like as they start getting built and then as they get developed in cases where we know there's a well going there because we know that the well comes later from the regulatory data sets. And some of our patents that were granted are actually around this whole idea of using regulatory data to train machine learning systems to recognize something in a photo. So the conventional way of training a computer vision machine learning system is to take pictures, have people generally mark the things you're trying to identify in the pictures, and then feed that back into the system so that the machine learning element basically starts learning what things am I supposed to be looking at. And the part that's a bit of kind of uh, uh, dark magic or maybe white magic is that the way these neural net systems are, and what we use this thing called a convolutional neural net, you actually don't know what they're doing. You don't know what's going inside the computer's brain. All you know is you're feeding a bunch of things in, and then you're measuring how good did the computer get at at identifying things that come out as being the same as the things that went in.
Hmm.
There's actually some pretty cool stuff like artwork you can find where people ran this in reverse. I saw this a few years ago, I think in Wired magazine or something, where they asked the computer like draw pictures of the things it recognized, and it's pretty freaky. I mean, it's cool, but it's like pretty abstract. Like a computer learns to recognize a dog, and then you're like, okay, now draw a dog. It doesn't look like a dog. It looks like some kind of weird space dog thing. So um, you don't necessarily know what's really happening in the neural net. You know that you're feeding it things that it's supposed to recognize, and then it figures out what are the things that it can identify that seem to correlate to what you were telling it to find. And so we have a bunch of patents around these ways that we developed of training the system to recognize well pads, frac ponds, frac crews, drilling rigs, not just by looking at the picture of the thing, but by using stuff that's not in the picture, but that is geospatially correlated to what we're trying to recognize, like drilling permits, well bores, past completions. And we've got a bunch of patents that were granted around doing that.
Hmm.
So creative ways of training the system. Uh, so then what the system does, this convolutional norm, that kind of system is, it basically breaks down the image smaller and smaller and keeps testing. Is there a thing that looks like what I'm looking for in this smaller and smaller and smaller picture? And then starts to break it out and identify like here there's some frac ponds, and in this case here's some output where the system identified all these well pads, and you might have missed one or two here or there. You're never getting perfection, but it's scanning these images, and one of the interesting insights is that at some point we had, as I mentioned, a big crew of people scanning these images, and the Permian Basin is 100,000 square miles, give or take, and these pictures come out a certain size. And after these people were trained, we started measuring, how quickly can we get through these images and mark them. And of course, people are making mistakes all the time. So then you have to have a backup. It's hard to stay focused, hour after hour on a picture like the one you're looking at right here, just marking boxes. And what we found was you would need about 100 people working full time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in order to scan imagery of the entire Permian Basin every 5 days and spot every new well pad and every frac pond.
Hmm.
And nobody's doing that. But our machine learning system can do that in less than an hour. And so we're able to, keep this running in a cost-effective way to analyze vast areas, which is a very different application from the more traditional use of satellite imagery or drone imagery, which is to monitor specific assets, your assets, for something that you want to alert for. Like something changed, something's on fire, or something's leaking. It's one thing to look at your own assets, maybe, a few square kilometers of area. It's a very different thing to monitor 100,000 square miles every day. Completely different process. And so that's where we needed this innovation that we were working on. And so then what came out of this was we started talking to companies in the space saying, basically, um, you know, every well needs a well pad, right? You have to clear off a level, clean, stable area to put all this heavy equipment, the drilling rig and the frac spread and all that. So we know that a well pad always comes before a well is drilled. Has to. Now, there's also supposed to be a drilling permit before the well is drilled. And usually drilling permit comes first. But which comes first? The drilling permit or the well pad? And no one knew the answer to that. And so we had a theory just from talking to people, sometimes the well pad might come first. And if it does, we would be able to see drilling plans before any other source, before that drilling permit comes in, because everybody follows the daily drilling permits. And so, stop at any SPE convention or, wherever you want to go and, or Doug Permian, and just stop anybody on the floor and say, hey, do you subscribe to some service that gives you drilling permit locations and rig locations? Yeah, of course. Why? Well, because I want to see who's going to be drilling where, so I can go get to them and try to sell them my stuff, or so I know where my competitors are going. What if we could show you that a few months earlier? You can do that? How and how much? So that we said, well, everybody seems to want this, but everybody wants some kind of proof that it really works. They don't want to make a bet based on something that's speculative. So what we did was we actually worked with some folks at Rice University and did a whole analysis, a study of over 12,000 wells that were drilled in the Permian, basically all of 2018, all of 2019, every over 12,000 wells drilled. And for every one of those wells, we analyzed the date and location of the wellbore, of the drilling permit, and of our system's detection of a well pad. And we made a three-way comparison there. So we were trying to quantify how often does the well pad come before the permit, how often does the permit come before the well pad, and how much does either one of them come before the spud. And I don't think anyone had ever looked at this before. And what you're seeing here is that as the system got better, they matched up very, very closely. So, I mean, I know there's a lot of text on here, but there are kind of a few big takeaways. One was after analyzing 12,000 plus wells over 2 years, every single one of them, we weren't, picking and choosing. We found that the well pad got built before the drilling permit was filed in about 1 out of 3 cases in both Texas and New Mexico. It wasn't a majority, but it was a lot. And of course, we're picking up the drilling permits every day too. So it's not like you're at any disadvantage, right? You're only getting an edge by seeing 1/3 of the wells sooner than you otherwise would have seen them. And when the well pad came first, it usually came first by a lot, like a couple of months. And you got to figure there's a bunch of reasons for that. But one of them is just a lot of this depends on construction crew schedules, right? So it's like when do you have your contractors available? You're going to go have them clear those roads and those pads before they move on to the next job. So a lot of times these things do get done quite a bit ahead of time. But the other interesting thing, maybe more interesting, is that when you had a drilling permit that came first, when the well pad appeared, that drilling permit was much more likely to get drilled and get drilled a lot sooner. And so you can avoid wasting your time chasing down permits that aren't going to get drilled anytime soon by focusing on the places where the operator has made the commitment to go forward. Because you know what? A drilling permit costs like $100 and you get it the same day or the next day, at least in Texas, maybe not in Colorado, but in Texas, if you want to drill an oil well and you got a lease and you're bonded, you get that permit within 24 hours of walking it into the railroad commission. But if you want to actually drill the well, you got to build a well pad too. And for the well pad, you got to get the contractor and you got to spend typically more than $100,000 to build that well pad. So it's a serious commitment. And so it just makes sense. An operator who's put a permit down is not as committed to drilling as an operator who's put down a permit and built the well pad. And that's what shows up here. You've got a much higher probability that they really are going to drill, and they're going to drill a lot sooner, is what we found, when you get that well pad showing up with the permit. And so it just helps you focus your efforts and not waste time on things that aren't really going to happen, in addition to giving that timing edge.
Hmm.
We also found, and it's not on here, that frac ponds correlate very, very highly to completions. So I think at last we found in the 2018 to 2020 period, there was like an 84% correlation between a frac pond appearing and a well being fracked, which again makes sense. But if you're using the traditional methods to figure out where completions are happening, you're waiting 6+ months for it to come out. Whereas if you're watching the frac pond, you're getting it ahead of time.
Hmm.
And so we called this whole system Dirt Work Alert, with the idea being seeing lease development, drilling plans ahead of permits and rigs. And the next step in this is to track frac crews, and we're within weeks of releasing the Frac Retracting system, because it's the frac crews that really determine the supply and demand. Today something like 96% of all new wells are horizontal wells. So drilling the well or where the rig is really actually doesn't tell you very much. You need to know where the frac crews are, because that tells you where they're going to use the sand, where they're going to use the water, where they're going to flow back the water, where they're about to have production and complete that well. And so where this all serves up is in this whole platform. So I mean, the big thing here is really the back end, which you can't look at, but we serve it up in this geospatial platform where it's got all the wells and all the disposals and all the leases, and it's showing the rigs moving around and showing the crews moving around, and it's breaking down the formations. And click on anything, see all the production curves for oil, gas, water out, water and gas in, by company, by well, by formation, by depth, and really letting people keep on top of all this stuff and figure out what's going on the surface and the subsurface. So a lot of work has gone into this over the years to make it kind of look nice. And then we pull all this data together. So now the one other thing I just want to touch on in terms of capabilities, and of course answer any questions you get into it, is lease road mapping. So one of the things is a little different, but it gets into the mobile phone tracking stuff. So one of the things we learned along the way, because we got asked for it a lot, is, can you map all the dirt roads that go to the well sites? Because these are not in Google, these are not in Waze, they're not in Apple Maps, but the average oil field worker spends about 20 minutes per day lost on lease roads, on big ranches. The roads don't have names. There's no driving directions, and they got to find an API number somewhere. And so actually, two of our patents, with a third pending, are specifically on combining satellite imagery with mobile phone tracking to create navigational maps of the dirt lease roads that are on all these ranches, to help the drivers find their way around. So that's another AI, ML, satellite imagery application that we've been working on that should help a lot with logistics optimization and efficiency, and saving time, and improving safety too. At least safety from people who might get shot at by granny who they're trespassing on her on her property.
So, yeah. So you're saying, where are we going? Where are you going?
Yeah. So one area, of course, is increasing the detection modalities in the satellite imagery, but it's really about, what we do uniquely is combine satellite imagery, mobile location data, and this regulatory big data framework to map surface and subsurface supply chain activity on a near daily or even a daily basis. And so we think that leads to some other things too. I mean, one is just more logistics optimization of supply chain of all kinds of things moving around the oil field. Some of it is doing better and better remote asset monitoring, especially for ESG stuff like methane emissions and flaring, water recycling, truck versus pipeline use uh, across large areas to create benchmarking, allow people to show the ones who are doing better, make it easy for them to show they're doing better. And then I think there's a lot of other areas where we can apply some of these technologies in other types of natural resource industries, forestry, mining, um, other types of energy sources, renewable energy sources, solar and wind, identifying capacity and optimization and placement there. And then getting into carbon management too, which is becoming a big thing. Some of the announcements you've seen from Occidental, from some of the other companies in the industry, where they're looking at creating businesses out of carbon management. Well, you need ways of being able to independently track and measure how much carbon are they, injecting into the ground, capturing in other ways, kind of what's that net impact. And so we're looking at different ways to use our system to measure that and associate it with the assets on the ground, um, to allow oil and gas operators and other types of energy companies to manage these systems more effectively and be able to get credit for what they're doing.
Hmm.
So that's where we kind of see further applications.
And right now, you mentioned Permian. That's pretty much where you're at. What do you see expanding into other basins?
Yeah, we do, and we are in some other basins. Just Permian is where we do everything that we do. So, the Permian accounts for such a large amount of energy activity. It's like
Yeah.
75% in the US now. So, if you're not in the Permian, you have to be, and we kind of need to be there first. We do cover rest of Texas, of course, for regulatory stuff and some of the other data, North Dakota, Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, a little bit, some aspects of Oklahoma. We do not cover Colorado or Wyoming yet. We don't want to cover Louisiana. But as we get people asking for additional coverage, we figure out how to do that. It's always just a resource allocation question for us, of course, because adding new geographies of things we have in the Permian versus adding new capabilities in the Permian, there's always a trade-off there because we're a pretty small crew and we got to be selective about what we're working on.
All right. So, how do people get a hold of you, and yeah, what kind of thing can they expect when they get a hold of you?
A good time. I guess you expect a good time. Um, the Well, our website is sourcewater.com, just like it
Hmm.
sounds, www.sourcewater.com. And you request a demo on there, and I'll see the email when it comes in. And if nobody calls you back, I'll be mad at them. Uh, and You can email me, Josh at sourcewater.com. Our office number in Houston is 713-909-4664. At least I hope that's the number. I don't call it that often myself, but sometimes the phone rings and someone answers. Yeah, we'd love to hear from people and hear creative ideas for how to apply what we're doing. And we're always, um, particularly on the water side, the industry is so complex and evolving. Everybody in this industry, especially on the operator side, is managing water differently. There's not standards, there's not standardization of jobs, of departments, of responsibilities, of best practices. Everybody's figuring it out. The whole thing's only 10 years old, and it's still settling in. So we're always surprised at the different ways that people need water data, or what they don't know they don't have, that we're able to do that can be done. um, that's an exciting area. And then with the satellite imagery and the mobile data, that's where that's where I get excited. Is, I mean, I'm somebody who kind of likes figuring out new stuff,
Right.
and so it's fun for me to put these technologies together in new ways and see what we can get out of it. And so our real as we we're rolling out frac crews and satellite imagery very soon, and drilling rigs. But then our development focus is really going to be on the mobile data, because that's just so new. And we're seeing some great results as far as literally tracking not every, but a lot of the water trucks, crude trucks, sand trucks as they're coming and going across whole basins. We do that all over the country, and really learning some cool things about, how much is being produced, picked up, delivered, from where to where, all those supply chain relationships, places where there can be efficiencies, places where there's opportunities to put in pipelines. So that's kind of where my attention is on that R&D side. But we love to hear from people at sourcewater.com. Request a demo, send me an email, and we'd love to give you a Zoom meeting.
All right. Well, Josh, thanks so much for seeing a super cool way of using, like you said, all the various data sources and AI to solve problems in the oil and gas space. So thanks again for being part of Digital Roughnecks.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having us on.